Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to World Filtration Institute Filtration Hour Air Quality Governance 2. I'm delighted and very privileged to be part of this group of people who care passionately about this subject. And I'm sure that if you're listening in from wherever you are into what we're discussing, you will find incredible insights into the way that you look at the world and the way that you look into what you're doing to help the world. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Iyad Al-Attar to say a few words before our very eminent group of panelists introduce themselves and we really get into the debate and the subject at hand. So Iyad, would you like to say a few words now?
Thank you, Phil, and good afternoon, morning, and evening, wherever you are. My name is Iyad Al-Attar. I'm the Strategic Director of the World Filtration Institute, an institute that is serious to bring critical topics like indoor air quality governance to the spotlight. We appreciate your attendance. We appreciate the attendance, the participation of our panelists. This is a critical topic and a very critical time where we need to bring things into perspectives, not only discuss, but also come up with recommendations to drive change. So very excited to be part of this. And Phil, back to you. Let's get started.
Thank you, Iyad. So let me start by introducing who we have as panel members today and their expertise in the particular area. But also I'd like them to talk about what they're passionate about for this area and why they think this is a critical moment in time for us to get things right, not only for our sector and for our industries that we work in, but for the people who actually are impacted by the way that we actually look, design, and try and create healthier built environments. So without further ado, let me introduce our first panel member, is Dr. Lagoudas, but I'll leave it for her to introduce herself and tell us exactly why she's interested in this area and what it means for her. So over to you, Georgia.
Thank you, Phil. Great to be here, and thanks to this organization for putting on an excellent panel today. Glad to be speaking with everyone. My name is Dr. Georgia Lagoudas, and I'm currently a senior fellow at Brown University and part of the faculty of the School of Public Health. And I'm working to advance indoor air quality policy, so exactly what we're talking about today, with a focus in the United States. And I came at this topic and why I'm very excited to continue working on it a few years ago when I was serving in the White House. And during the Biden administration, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, was surprised that we were facing a major respiratory disease, and we were not talking about clean indoor air and how to reduce transmission through the air in buildings. And so I launched an initiative to improve air quality and engaged with EPA, CDC, and a few others to launch actions to clean indoor air. And I think from that, recognized how it has not been part of our common dialogue to say that clean indoor air should be a common good. It should be an expectation when you walk into a building, and we should have some minimum health standards in buildings to improve public health. And so that's what has been driving my current work at Brown University, both at the state level as well as with some international partners.
Thank you, Georgia. Our next panel member is Nick Agopian. Nick, would you care to introduce yourself? And I guess importantly, things like this have a personal and family impact on us wherever we are in the world, okay? What really drives and motivates you to actually consider what we need to do to create better and healthier built environments from your perspective?
Thank you. So good morning, everybody, and thank you to the World Filtration Institute for conveying this critical discussion on air governance. My name is Nick Agopian, and I've spent over 30 years working at the intersection of HVAC and indoor air quality, including serving on several ASHRAE standards and committees. Today, as the built environment grapples with post-pandemic expectations, things like wildfire smoke, which now apparently has a season here, urbanization and climate-driven stressors, it's becoming very clear that governance around air quality must and has to evolve. we must move beyond static compliance frameworks as we have today and move toward performance-based policies that reflect real-world conditions, protect human health, and to allow room for innovation from manufacturers. We stand at a pivotal point, and I'd like to use this example, much like Willis Carrier introduced mechanical air conditioning to the world that had never air-conditioned indoor air previously. And today, as health and performance implications of indoor environments become undeniable, it is essential that scientists, engineers, and policymakers come together to actively govern the air we breathe indoors with the same rigor and urgency once applied to temperature control. So I'm very honored and delighted to be here. I look forward to contributing to this dialogue on how science and policy and technology could come together to define healthier and more resilient future. And I'd like to say one breath at a time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Our next panel member is Dr. Ellie Amirnasr. I think the pronunciation is correct.
Correct.
Ellie, but excellent. From your perspective, and I would kind of lead the people who are viewing this to look at the different types of panel members and their differential perspectives on this problem, okay? Part of what we're trying to bring together is different views in this. What's your perspective on this, Ellie?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm very excited. I've been involved in clean air management in the past, I think 8 to 10 years. When I started my clean air management journey, basically, it was about 8 years ago that co-founded a startup and digital solution for clean air management. And when the technology was evolving around, like, IoT solutions and AI and all of these things, and we were going after customers, especially when COVID happens, like, oh, that's a holy grail, that the customers, they want to know what's going on and they want to take action. We realized that there is a mismatch between the policies that exist, the design of the filtration system or HVAC system that exists from old to new, and then the behavioral traits that exist in terms of getting air quality or clean air as the basic right, not a luxury. And this is where we actually have to bring all of these three together. So when you are actually having the technology ready for it to mitigate a problem, the adoption rate for it is also there. That combines the match between the policies, the design of other technologies that goes with it, as well as the behavioral traits.
Thank you, Ellie. And I'm sure we'll explore the human behavior aspect of the built environment in particular, because we must remember that human beings change both the physical environment and the physics of the environment in ways that we never could have thought of when we originally designed buildings. So thank you, Ellie, for that. Good to explore. Our next panelist, definitely not least, is Mr. Peter Cantone. Peter, can you give us an introduction to yourself? And again, in particular, why this subject matter really is of interest to you from both a personal and an organizational perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Webb. Thank you on the World Filtration Institute, especially Dr. Iyad Al-Attar and Mitch McCreary. My passion is, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been in the spray foam insulation world for 18 years. So indoor air quality was something I knew about, but was never in depth on. I live in New Rochelle, New York, which was the epicenter of the pandemic on the East Coast of the United States, with 4 daughters in the public school at the time. That became the biggest topic for me, and it has stayed with me ever since. So from a personal standpoint, my wife is a teacher, my daughters were in the public school system, and I was very, very involved in the public schools in New Rochelle. So I understand the bureaucracy and the Board of Ed and superintendents and all the good stuff that goes with K-12 public schools in the US. And so I took that information, I took that experience and focused really on bringing practical and pragmatic approaches to bringing better indoor air quality, meeting higher standards to the schools. And this topic is really exciting to me because I feel, after speaking with many, many different schools throughout the US, one of the biggest things is the challenge that we have is not only an educational challenge from understanding indoor air quality, but also a funding problem. And if we can't solve the funding problem, we're not going to get to the indoor air quality problem. And so when we talk about what governance can do, my feeling is that we really need a combination of governance supporting the private sector. And so that's what I would like to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So the issue about schools is a very interesting one. I'm sat here in London, having just addressed the Chartered Institute of Building Engineers, almost shaming them about post-occupant environmental data that we've gained from schools that bear no resemblance to a healthy environment for our most vulnerable young adults. So I think schools and the governance around this and how it's impacting on people as they move through being a child into adulthood and inheriting health deficits as a consequence of it is a key area for us. If we can do one thing, protecting the well-being of our future generation must be at the highest level of priority for all of us. So that's all I was going to say for myself. I think we really would get into some of this conversation now. I think it will be a meaningful debate. I don't think it will be without controversy, though. I think that there are issues that we need to discuss openly that will be controversial, both to ourselves as people talking about this on the panel and the people listening to what we're talking about. From my perspective, the status quo is not good enough for the well-being of all of our future generations, irrespective of geospatial locality or where we are in the world. So with that, I suggest we get into the conversation then.
So I just wanted to thank everyone. Clearly, from the opening statements, we can see that indoor air quality and its governance beats in the heart of every person, individual, family, and potentially country and continent. So because of that, we address this topic. Because of that, we have Indoor Air Quality Governance 2 session. The one previous to that was a couple of months ago. So as I said earlier, World Filtration Institute will continue to bring this topic to the spotlight. But let me share with you a couple of things. And before we do that, we want to thank our marketing director, who is not very well today, but we wish him all the best. So Mitch, get well soon. We are waiting patiently for you to get back. And again, thank you, Dr. Phil Webb, for being here with us today to moderate this important session. Let me just ask you a couple of questions. First, today we're urbanizing in such a fast pace. We're going to be adding 2.5 billion people to the urban environment. Early in the 1800s, we're only 5% urbanized. That's going to mean if we continue to urbanize with the current rate, we're adding 2.5 billion people to the urban environment. We do not want to urbanize people from poverty to pollution. So that means we need to do a tremendous sustainable urban development homework, where air quality not only remains as a pillar, but a common denominator of every single aspect of design we do, on a building scale, on a city scale, and on a country scale. So it's a fact, we're polluting so much. There are just so many sources where we continue to pollute, and it's not just particulates, as you can see on the screen, where again, particulates are many, but also we are polluting in terms of gases. There comes then, a couple of samples here. You see an emission of nitrogen monoxide and carbon monoxide over a span of a year. So as we continue to heat and pollute our environment, which basically led to a broken planet, and that we need to fix, of course, air quality comes in as an important aspect of what we're trying to do. Adding to our challenges are pandemics, wildfires, the way we combust fossil fuel and sandstorms, volcanoes. Every time one of these incidents happen, we go back to the drawing board, trying to ask new questions, demanding new answers. So how do we cohesively respond to these changes and challenges? Isn't it that our environmental behavior is driving our environmental challenges? And what is air quality lies in all of this? Is it just the quest for clean air? And if it's true, and believing that we spend up to 90% of our time indoors, and that's filtration sensitive, that's heating and ventilation sensitive as well, and air conditioning, and believing that we inhale up to 13,000 liters per day, it seems that whatever low concentration exists or is airborne in the atmosphere or indoors is going to be very significant in terms of health impacts. The air quality quest leads to so-called clean air quest. And now we are 8.2 billion people. Clean air is now rendered and looked at as a human right. So we need to know what we are promising people. So what is really clean air? Where do we get clean air? Is it clean air means that we take polluted air and we take out pollutants, and that's going to render the polluted air clean? Let's assume this is true. What pollutants are we looking at? Is it a menu of particulates? And that's like could be thousands, or potentially bioaerosols or gases. And what are the concentrations where we'll be holding building management and facility directors and maintenance companies responsible for rendering that polluted air clean? Or do we really mean filtered air when we refer to clean air? So maybe that's a topic that we can discuss today. And eventually we agree on how tight and right are our standards and our implementation. Then comes the governance. And the question perhaps comes up is, how do we govern something that's not very well developed? We still have so much to do on implementation. We still have so much to do on awareness and education, and also incentive programs and getting people to respond to indoor air quality variations and priorities. So how do we legislate and regulate that? And how can we have a stimulus program where banks, governments, and even occupants and communities can be part of that social change? And what kind of cities we want? How do we pioneer prosperity? You know, we have huge and massive goals and ambitions, but are we willing to embrace the required social change that will position us to be able to transpire these ambitions? Well, one thing we recommend is we have to widen the lens. We look at filtration as a low-hanging fruit. We think with filtration technologies, we're maybe able to capture every single pollutant that we emit. So we are in a continuous vicious cycle that we want to filter exactly what we just emitted. So one responsible action is to be responsible and cautious to our emission, and also look at indoor air quality, not so much in specific, but widening the lens to look at indoor environmental quality. But that's also going to require that we fix the hardware first, because I cannot ask more of a ventilation system that either malfunctioning or defective or leaking. I cannot ask more filtration systems that are deficient and filters that are failing due to inappropriate selection or operation. So prior to demanding indoor air quality governance, let's ask, how do we design cities? How do we select filters? How do we urbanize people from poverty to prosperity, not to pollution? Why do we design cities for people and then construct them for cars? Many questions that come up and hover in our mind when we think of what change we want to induce to have a planet that is worth fighting for. So are we willing to change it, or are we just happy to chance it? How do we get the message communicated in the way we change the way we live, combust fossil fuel, and commute? And really, it's very important to think that having the intentions alone is not going to get things done. Having the technologies alone is not going to get things done. And demanding step back and asking the governments to do things for us is also not sufficient. We also going to need leadership. And when I ask for leadership, it is the leadership within communities before we ask for leadership from governments. How do we take charge to change? And how do we get our buildings and building envelopes to be a sustainable and healthy places to live? It boils down to two things: where our votes and voices are going, asking the right questions. What do we really want governments to do for us? Can governments actually give us filtered and clean air? Can indoor air quality governance become an empty concept in the absence of textbook implementation? Are we willing to embrace the social change and bear the social cost of social change? What are the most appropriate governance models in the context of indoor air quality governance to render our built environment in cities pandemic-proof, not just be ready for the next pandemic? To do that, we bring the experts here at World Filtration Institute to address topics like this. And at this point, I would love to pass it on to Dr. Phil Webb to start the conversation. Phil, take it away.
Iyad, thank you so much for that. As per usual, I was so excited to get into the conversation and the debate about this that I forgot that we needed the context behind it. So thank you so much for that.
No problem, you're on.
So I guess for me to start this all off, and I'll say the first controversial point, yeah. In systems that we work in, we live in, we collaborate in, we have our children in, there are certain things that drive what we do, and expecting the system to produce differential outcomes without changing anything is Einstein's first theory of madness. Yeah. So we would be mad just expecting differential outcomes for the health and well-being of our populations without changing everything, right? So change is a critical concept for us to grapple with in the way that we're doing this. So I would like to open up this from the perspective of what really needs to change for us to be able to build better environments, healthier buildings for healthier people. Peter.
Thank you, Phil. Dr. Webb. So really at its core, it's not as complicated as it looks like. And at its core, what we're finding out is that most of the change that is happening today is changing to the minimum ventilation code. That's what we're setting the bar at, is ASH rate 62.1, at least here in the United States. And so that's at the very core is what needs to be changed. There is an ASH rate 241, and that should be our next goal. Being able to bring that code from 62.1 to 241 takes an understanding of what 241 is. And at this point, what we have, not to go off on a tangent, but we have very successful upgrading of infrastructure in the K-12 market with regards to energy savings construction. So there's a lot of companies called energy service corporations in the US, and what they go in and they work on a performance contract, energy performance contracts, and they do a great job going in and taking out all old boilers and upgrading to heat pumps, etc. But what they're missing out on is in this entire construction is not going to 241. Everything that they're doing is geared to the old ventilation code. That's really not meant for anything but more of thermodynamics and thermal. It's more of a comfortability type of code versus cleaning air code. So that's my answer for that.
Thank you, Peter. Right. So I'm going to say something controversial on the back of what Peter said. Okay. there are more variables in a built environment outside of air quality that affect the health and well-being of people using it, Georgia, right? Are we discounting the impact of poor lighting, noise pollution, yeah? Not just thermal comfort, but humidity. We're now seeing evidence of the pursuit of things like net zero, creating condensation and mold in countries that have never had a mold problem because of a slavish attitude towards government incentives, okay? Surely we need a more comprehensive model if our objective is to protect the health and well-being of people using buildings. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, happy to take a first approach with that. Thank you for helping us be a bit controversial today, Phil. I would start by saying I am biased because I have thought about this from a pandemic lens, a pandemic resilience lens. And through that, I have also learned and worked with experts about the broader ecosystem of indoor environmental quality and its importance, as you outline. I think at some point we have to prioritize to say where to start and then how do we bring other entities as a part of this. My thesis or hypothesis would be that we should start with air quality as a first step because that is the mode through which disease and pathogens can be transmitted, along with other impacts on our health that include cognitive function that can be degraded with high CO2 and poor air transmission. That includes the light and the humidity and the space around it. But we have millions of people dying every year from respiratory infectious disease. If you double the amount of ventilation in an airspace and have clean air delivery rate, you can cut the risk of transmission rate in half. That seems pretty good. Studies have shown by improving ventilation, you can cut sick leave from employees by over 30%. And so I just say that as for me, I'd first approach this topic from a sense of are we okay? I think it is unreasonable to say we're okay getting 3 to 5 respiratory diseases per year on average. That just like we have fixed our sanitation system with clean water, we should approach it with the same lens for clean air. So that is my approach to this topic, that is, I think, a very strong first hook. And with that, I think we need to raise the bar for all other aspects of indoor environmental quality with this angle that we spend 90% of our time indoors. And it is important for us to feel good, function good, think well, breathe well, in all of those aspects.
Thank you, Georgia. So, Ellie, from an industry perspective and from the ability to pragmatically be able to federate this type of technology in a financial envelope that's got to be very attractive to the people who are doing manufacturing and construction, but also having some kind of health outcome, how do you square that off?
That's a good question, but also it's a very complex question. When I'm kind of summing up what Peter and Georgia said, and with the experience that we had with talking to facility managers and their incentives of what they need to do for equality, you realize that the decision makers and the beneficiaries are completely different people, and they're not facility managers, right? So the ones that they want better air quality for their employees, as you said, less sick leave and all of these things, is most probably the HR department or the executives in the company. However, the facility managers their KPIs are completely different, what they have to deliver, and they stick to that. They don't have any KPIs around clean air and well-being of the employees, at least on the top. It's changing a little bit, but the departments who are responsible for the well-being of the employees and operating the buildings are two different companies. And then the department that decides on which technology goes in is usually the IT department. So the decision makers are different, and their KPIs are not matching or kind of cohesive to one goal in the company. Sometimes that's where when as a technology provider, what Georgia said in terms of like, focusing on the well-being of employees, we go in and talk to facility managers. They said like, nice, but I have a lot of fires to put down. And I have to like, fix the chiller, and I have to fix this one. And my KPI is to save money for the company and save energy for the company, not how many sick leaves I'm reducing, for example, or how productive is the employee. So this is a little bit of mismatch of KPIs and decision makers for the air quality and the impact on the people inside the building, which I think if this at some point can come together and go under one umbrella, then we can actually discuss the path forward.
Ellie, thanks so much for that. So it resonates with the conversation that I've just had in London, and they describe it as the CapEx versus the OpEx model.
Exactly.
Right? Now, Nick, how can we, with a moral conscience, say that we're going to scrimp and save up in the design section of any buildings we construct or any retrofit we can do, when the downstream OpEx implications is going to cost in England 4.08 billion per year due to very unhealthy buildings because of marginal incremental gains in finances as part of the design stage? How does that sit well with us?
Okay, so this question, excellent question, by the way, but this question ties everything that was just discussed. And I want to come back a little bit to what Peter said on what is the minimum requirements that are going to be regulated. And I think that's a word that hasn't been used yet. The minimum standards that are needed that must be governed by, number one, the policymakers that say, yes, good indoor air quality, or let's just use the word acceptable indoor air quality. And I know that's going to open up maybe Pandora's box to say, well, define acceptable indoor air quality. Well, these minimum standards for good indoor air quality or acceptable air quality that must start again by governance that writes what does that mean for standards, which will then be operationalized on the design level, which will mandate what are the minimum costs going to be to achieve that. Because we understand the downstream side to what was said, these costs for illnesses, lost productivity are clear and present, and we understand them, but they haven't been operationalized, or at least minimally. Governance is saying, well, they're not important for us right now because they're having to deal with other factors. But when we're looking at OpEx and CapEx debates, there is a differential. But bringing everything in under one umbrella, I think, is going to allow us the possibility to say we're going to offer legislation that will mandate the minimum standards on whatever that is. And I know we can define what minimum standards must be, but I do know that they are elevating because science is now proving that, yes, there is a health impact, and we'll just pick something as simple as PM 2.5. We know PM 2.5 has detrimental effects, and even PM 0.5 and PM 1 and so on and so forth. And that is changing what the minimum standards are going to be today. But without, again, the regulatory environment that's going to say there's somebody that has to pay if you don't do this, I think we're going to have a problem moving forward. And to what Dr. Iyad said earlier, the governance way at the top is going to have to mandate to say it doesn't matter what these costs are. But I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. It's important to understand that these initial costs for CapEx have to be implemented. And yes, of course, if you understand the regulatory environment, then someone's going to have to pay if OpEx doesn't fulfill the need, meaning that you have, yes, as what Ellie just mentioned, you have IT that has to get involved in decision making. You have the people that operate these buildings have to be armed with whatever is needed to make sure that they maintain whatever is required for good indoor air quality.
Great, Nick. I'm going to bring in Georgia. And a little bit of context from Wales. So Wales is a tiny country, right? We don't rate compared to the US or Germany, etc. But we do have very interesting legislation. So we've got an act called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And to your point, Nick, I would say to everyone involved in this particular sector, they have to obey wellbeing of future generations. They cannot just think short-termism in legislation in Wales about what happens right now. They have to think about what happens in the future. Georgia, what's your perspective on this?
I wanted to add into Nick's point, because this is a great question, Phil, to think about, why should an entity consider having additional costs and how to approach that topic. But I want to pause and say, we've done this many times over as governments and as nation states in the past decades, in the past century plus, right? We've done this for fire safety. At some point in the United States, in the 70s, we had a series of very bad, dangerous fires that killed dozens of people in the United States. And then as a nation, we decided to invest in public health, spends billions of dollars per year to require fire safety infrastructure in buildings. And now we have a regulatory system that once a year inspects buildings for fire safeties, right? Someone comes in and looks at your fire sprinkler, your carbon monoxide detector. They also inspect other things potentially along with that, like elevators and stair exits. We do that. We've done that. We've also done that for restaurant food safety. We've decided we don't want to get sick from food. And so we've all decided to pay in as a society to have inspections of restaurants. So I say this as an example that, right, we need a few different approaches to create momentum around indoor air quality. I imagine many people online and all of us as panelists, we are living and breathing this, and we're already champions, but we need to generate a public movement that demands cleaner indoor air and decides as a society, yes, we should invest it.
Thanks, Georgia. Right, so I'm going to address my next kind of question to you as a panel. My lungs are my lungs, irrespective if I'm sat in Cardiff breathing air, sat in New York City breathing air, or sat in Sydney breathing air. Why isn't there harmonization of standards globally, right? I'm me, irrespective of where I am in the world. Why are your standards different, and why should I be treated differently depending on where I go? So, Nick, do you want to start off with that one?
Okay, great question. And I also would like to mention something. I love what Dr. Georgia just said. I want to elaborate on how much food we eat, how much water we drink, and how much air we breathe. And that coincides with what Dr. Iyad mentioned earlier. And this is in the imperial system. We eat about 4 pounds of food a day. And to what Dr. Georgia said, we're so particular about the food and we have so many regulations. And if you go to a place like even McDonald's, they have these little signs that they follow where if something's been out for more than a few minutes or whatever, they throw it out. So we got a lot of regulations when it comes to food safety. And Dr. Georgia is so on point with that. We drink about 4 pounds of water a day. And I have a bottle of water that happens to be beside me. And interestingly enough, it actually has an expiry date, which we all know water has been around for billions of years and it's just recycled. But we do have that regulatory aspect, even for drinking water. We breathe in 31 pounds of air a day on average. But we have no expiry date. We're trying to understand what is the half-life of air. And that was a debate that's been ongoing in ASHRAE standards for when we bring in outdoor air. When is outdoor air no longer considered clean or performing the way it should and flushing out contaminants? And we have no regulations for that and understanding that. So putting in, again, the regulatory requirement where people come in and test the air, such as what the World Building Institute is doing today, in some of the buildings that are certified must be homogeneous across all structures. Because if we don't do that, I think we're going to end up to what was described as you know, with fires and fire safety. Now, to go to harmonizing, I think that given the discrepancies between ASHRAE standards, ISO, and EN standards, there needs to be a step, and it may require the filtration community to take some lead on trying to harmonize minimum indoor air quality performance metrics, or IEQ, because yes, even lighting has an impact on how we experience indoor air. But I don't think it's going to be singular in nature. It's going to be difficult because, as an example, ASHRAE says, well, we need to do this because in North America, maybe there are certain idiosyncrasies that are specific to North America. EN or ISO, they may say, oh, yeah, it's specific for us. But I don't believe that's the case, because you're right. Lungs are lungs. And there must be a way to try to recognize the confusion and the fragmentation that's caused by these different standards. However, when you have certain people that work in ASHRAE committees and also represent, let's say, as an example, the US TAG and ISO committees, they do find common denominators, because at the end of the day, PM 2.5 or PM1 in North America is, you know, obviously the same in Europe as well. So progress towards harmonizing, you know, should include dual labeling by manufacturers, and I think this is going to be important. As an example, MERV 13/ISO EPM1, you know, greater than 55%, as an example. Maybe that's something that can help start the harmonization across the board. And when it comes to standards, we need to, I guess, for them, what's the best word I can use? We need to make sure that we pick certain aspects of each, and hopefully by the time we harmonize them, we've got the best of the best. And what I mean by that is I'm starting to see manufacturers in North America offer both a MERV rating that would say MERV 13/10A, because we know we require Appendix J in deconditioning the filter so that there's no static charge, as an example. But if we pick each one and come up with the best, I think we can ultimately come up with some kind of harmonization. I'm sorry if I went too long.
Excellent. So we're coming up to coffee break. I've got two hands. So Iyad and then Peter, and then we're going to coffee. It's going to crank up and will become more controversial after coffee break. Iyad, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. Excellent question. Let me just say a couple of things. Let's put things, let's go back to basic principles. What is ailing indoor air quality governance? Let's identify at least 3 or 4 or 5 segments. I would say, off the top of my head, insufficient scientific data, lack of understanding between the chemistry and the biology of pollutants, complex exposure to respiratory system of multiple pollutants. 3, the lack of the communities or the users or the facility management to be able to present to the government officials economic models that if you fail to do this, you're going to have the following consequences. And the fourth one is not only the privacy issue, but the fact that we always have to be driven by incidents like pandemics, wildfires, volcanoes. Look at the past 30 years. When did air quality come or fell under the analytical knife? It's always driven by some sort of an environmental disaster. This has got to change. We cannot be reacting to pandemics. We cannot be reacting to indoor air quality variations. We need governance. That's going to require 2 things. 1, we go to the government officials and say, look, we have some policy gaps. or you have some policy reforms, we can bridge these gaps because the industry got the technology. Or if you cannot specify it, we can provide the training as industry or the universities or research institutes, center of excellence. But government officials will have to kind of step forward to bring the kind of change that indoor air quality will be able to be propelled, not punished. This is my point today. Indoor air quality governance need to be not only a pillar or a metric, it needs to be the starting point where you start to design cities and urban plan. I cannot even accept the notion of saying this is a sustainable urban development if air quality does not beat in the heart of every building envelope, building and block. But now let's take Peter and then get to coffee because I smell the coffee and donuts coming up.
I'll try to make this quick. Thank you. So just regards to harmonizing, right, around the world, I look at, to take a step back, sports. You have coaches that coach all different types of teams, and they follow certain principles, and they're great coaches. And Ted Lasso can coach a great football team, and all of a sudden he's coaching soccer in England and doing really well. And what do? They all follow a process. They all follow certain principles. And that's the same thing with indoor air quality globally. And when we're looking at ASHRAE 241, they have a process that's set up. It's not a perfect process, but it's a great baseline to start off of. And so when we focus on wherever you are in the world, that process is going to work, whether you're in Australia or in China. And the process being, getting to that 40 in a classroom setting, specifically getting to that 40 CFM of equivalent clean air, the usage of equivalent clean air in all these different dynamic settings is critically important. And the standard is there. It's there for us to use. It's there for us to continue to make better, but it's there.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. So I guess we're in the coffee now, which is a little bit shortened, and then we'll kick it off. And I've got something really tasty to ask both Georgia and Ellie when we kick off after coffee.
Thank you, Phil. Also, a reminder to our audience that you can participate. You can have your voice heard. This is what World Filtration Institute is all about. Get your voice heard, prepare your questions. We will enable you to ask questions live to the panelists. I do believe we have a question from Mr. Andrew Guido, who has been a previous panelist, distinguished panelist with us. So Andrew, please have your question ready. We will start with this question when we resume. Enjoy your coffee. Back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. We are now in the second session of this Filtration Hour, addressing indoor air quality governance 2. A message to the audience: if you do have a question, please drop it at the chat box, or feel free to get the mic and have your voice heard. We do have a question from our previous panelist who's attending today. Thank you very much. Andrew, are you live? Okay, so while we get Andrew to ask his question, Phil, are you back?
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to be taking some questions from the audience now. Good audience participation as well. So do you want to take it from Paul's question or Charles' question, Iyad? Which one do you want to do?
Let's start with Paul, and then we go to Andrew live, while Dr. Sun grants Andrew the mic.
So panelists, this is from Paul through chat. For many years, our industry tried to heighten awareness of the importance of good IAQ. COVID highlighted the impact and the risks of poor IAQ systems in buildings, and some people tried to upgrade and change standards in use. It doesn't appear that these changes are now standard or widespread. Is this true? And if so, how can the industry or WFI promote these changes more aggressively? Who'd like to start there? Let's start with Georgia.
Happy to. I was thinking Peter might also be well placed, given that Peter saw what happened in school. So I'll add a little bit, and then perhaps Peter can also chime in. I was just reflecting in throughout my work, working at the federal level, now a lot at the state level in the United States, we've seen kind of a bottom up and a top down approach. So I'm thinking in this case, right, there are ways to raise the minimum bar or require that for schools, vulnerable settings, nursing homes, and other places to make something kind of required or a standard. And there's also the other end of the bell curve, which may be the commercial building sector and sectors that have more money to spend and more resources and can be leading the edge on voluntary standards. So I'm reflecting on this. I think one piece that we have seen through our work is a number of buildings have now pulled back, as Paul shares in the question, of pulled back in some of their incentives or investments in building standardization. So I think we need to push on both ends of that bell curve, which means having a better encouragement, whether it's through city tax incentives or city public building changes, to say we're going to have a minimum standard for healthy buildings, and we're going to create a market demand and market transformation in that way. I think there was a role for government as well as WFI and having an industry voice for that. And then at the same time, creating, I think we need to start with voluntary unified standards, whether at the city level, state level, or federal level, that says these are some goalposts or metrics to aim for. So we're doing this now with 4 different states in the United States, which is setting voluntary guidelines for school standards, to first say, let's have an assessment of buildings once a year, and then from there move to have requirements. So that's kind of my mental model of those 2 ends, but I'm sure Peter has more to add.
So Peter, before I bring you in, the bit that concerns me significantly is global inequalities in this particular space, right? The differential gap between people who have and people who have not, people who can afford and people who just can't afford it, both from a geospatial basis and even within an in-country space, okay? It worries the heck out of me that we create massive inequalities in health outcomes just from a payment perspective. Peter, what's your view on this?
My view is that we have our priorities a little wrong, and that is with respect to incentives. So right now, reducing the carbon footprint is priority number 1. Indoor air quality is not even anywhere in the top 10. It's somewhere real low. And we see this coming through because you see these very large mechanical engineering companies doing fantastic jobs reducing the carbon footprint on many of the schools in the US. A lot of schools have partnered up with energy service corporations to do an excellent job with performance contracts, but none of it, zero, has to do with anything other than meeting that ventilation, that minimum ventilation code. And so what we need to do from a governance standpoint is, and Dr. Lagoudas touched on it, is incentivizing indoor air quality and understanding that 241 is not out of reach. Because if you read through 241, we'll understand that it's not that expensive to get the 40 C equivalent clean air. I'm talking specifically with K-12. You can get there. There's if you look, if you're thinking outside the box, you can understand that the standard is there to be able to, that it's an achievable standard. It's not something that's a pie in the sky. It's going to cost 3 times more than what it should cost. And we're talking about literally a fraction of a cost of some of these energy service corporations contracts that are out there. That can go from ASH rate 62.1 to now all of a sudden the school has 241. But they don't know this. The school doesn't know this. The engineers themselves don't even know it. So these are the things that need to change. And incentivizing indoor air quality would allow that mechanical engineer to all of a sudden now pay attention to 241 and see where they can fit it into their contracts and when they're making their recommendations. That's really the key at the core of the whole thing.
Thanks, Peter. All right, did we have somebody who wanted to actually ask a live question then?
Yeah, let's get Nick, 30 seconds, please, because we have a live question from Andrew. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I'd like to elaborate on 241. 241 was put in place quickly in order to allow the government to lift the pandemic restrictions. It isn't an ANSI approved, but will be ANSI approved very shortly. However, this is a huge, huge endeavor. And it's like trying to have a super tanker turn like an F1 Formula One car. It's going to take some time, but I can say that yes, people are starting to adopt it, and it is starting by the federal government, at least here in the United States. VA hospitals are adopting 241. The GSA is adopting 241. And the federal government is taking some leadership, which should be a guiding beacon light for everybody else. But it's going to be incumbent on all of us and others to start promoting 241 to the specifying consulting engineers, because I've had 3 lunch and learns this week, 3 breakfast and learns, and had 11 meetings, and only 1 of those consulting engineering firms knew about 241. So education is going to be paramount moving forward. But I do think that the needle is starting to shift slowly, but we need to accelerate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Phil, now we have a question from Andrew Guido. Andrew, can you?
Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for including me, and what an incredible panel and exciting discussion this morning. But I'm going to pick up on what Peter and Nick talked about before my question. So we may be, so we're a builder, we're in North America, we've got operations in Canada, the United States. And I'm proud to share that we may be the one of, or maybe the first builder to have implemented ASHRAE 241 in one of our test homes. And just for fun, I retrofitted an existing home to see if it's possible to take a home that we already built and to make the changes. And it took a few tweaks to doing it. And I can confirm, like, the cost is embarrassingly low. It's a fraction of 1% at the new stage. And then at the existing stage, it can be done, and it depends on what was done and what you have to change for doing it. So it's just a matter of having the will to do it. And this goes to my question, which is, as builders, we have a disproportionate impact on people's health, and yet we do not know this. And, and I don't, I meet a lot of people in this industry, and I don't think any one of them is trying to do anything purposely that would hurt somebody, because, it could be their grandparents living in a home or their child. It's the lack of education. And as thinking about the governance side, although it's not perfect, we've had a movement with ESG and sustainability reports, and with SASB and many of the accounting firms jumping on this as they saw a gold mine in creating standards for reporting. Couldn't we do the same on this side, to create something as as powerful as what we've seen on the ESG and sustainability side with reporting standards? That's the question.
Andrew,
Thank you,
thanks for
Phil.
that
I think
question.
Ellie wants to address that question. Ellie?
I actually have a question for Andrew. Thank you so much for raising your hand and bringing up this question. My question towards you is that, is there any, in your community and society of the builders, is there any incentive or reward kind of considered or shared if you, for example, provide a healthy building or care about the well-being of the builders, or it's only standards? Because you mentioned in your question, like, your colleagues, and they fall into the bare minimum standard that they can provide. To actually go that extra step, similar to the sustainability, that there is, like, tax credit or any of these incentives, is there anything considered for providing those benefits to the residents of the building you built?
Yeah, at this stage, there's none that I'm aware of. In the US, you have, under the Biden administration, you have 45L that will encourage you to do energy efficient updates. But there's none on this side. The only reward is the satisfaction of knowing that you did something good and that it helped your brand. And unfortunately, that's good enough for a small minority of builders, and there's some that I know that do an incredible job. But for the vast majority, the ones that build 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 90,000 homes a year, I don't see any evidence at this stage.
So it's very interesting. We've just had a conversation through the Chartered Institute of Building Engineers here in London about the role of post-occupant audit linked to incentivized payments for better outcomes for people and occupants using buildings tailored for the lifetime of the building. Yeah. So the idea behind this from a fiscal and financial perspective is that you would get a core payment as commissioned to build and hand over a building, and then you'd have regular audits on the health and well-being of people and occupants using the building, and you would get additional payments all the way through the lifetime of the building as an incentive to actually create a better, healthier building. So I think some of this thinking is starting to emerge. Georgia, what's your perspective on this then, from a regulation perspective?
Yeah, I'd love to add a little more. Andrew, thanks for your excellent question. I think it's important for us to think about and the model of the energy performance movement and the green energy movement. I think there are a lot of translational best practices. The model there was, number one, there were voluntary standards and voluntary incentives as a first piece. And then ultimately, now we're seeing a few cities, at least in the United States, come out with required building energy performance reporting, right? So something about transparency, say how much energy your building is using. And then we've reached the next phase of not just requiring transparency, but now we're requiring in some cities to meet certain targets. And that's where there have been fiscal incentives like the carrot, and now there will start to be some sticks. And I think that is a similar path that could be envisioned for the role of building owners and building development for indoor air quality, if you agree with that, Andrew. I would say there's a caveat that in the green building movement, there has been a lot of funding from the federal government in the United States, billions of dollars of funding that supported the private sector movement in this case. And that has not been thus far equivalent with indoor air quality and the health of buildings, right? We have a few institutions and organizations that are incorporating this, like LEED and US Green Building Council, the World Green Building Council, International Wellbeing Institute with the Well certification, right? There's programs that are incorporating it, but the orders of magnitudes of funding that supported this transformation in the United States has yet to occur. I will say that the model that I have been thinking about in our community of work in the United States has been, first, make this a priority for federal leaders and city leaders and state leaders. If governors are talking about this in California or New York or Rhode Island or Texas, or if the White House is talking about this, or leadership of the Department of Energy is talking about this, even if there aren't dollars spent, but it's indicated to be a priority, that is the start of change. That was what we had done some work in the Biden administration, was to create leadership prioritization for this. And then the second phase is create models and metrics. I'm thinking, Andrew, right? We actually gathered a group of about 20 commercial building owners and ventilation engineer design firms to say, how do we help transform and actually put in practice? How do we operationalize indoor quality monitoring and performance standards? And what everyone told us is, wait, we don't want to go first. We don't have a model to follow. And so in some ways, also having protocols that are open to the public and standardized, that probably in the United States right now, the state of California would be a great place to be able to share this, rather than, I think, waiting on the EPA. But those are some thoughts, Andrew. Thank you again for that question.
Thanks, Georgie. Before I bring Nick in, it seems to me, if I was going to make an observation on this, that there needs to be a coordinated effort to get various different perspectives on a building, right? So let's not just confine this to talk about air quality and filtration, okay? The building needs different perspectives in the way that we design, develop, commission, and deliver a building. And it has to reflect the life cycle of the building and the impact of the building on its surroundings and the occupants, okay? Nick, what would be your view on this, then?
Okay, just about 15, 20 seconds. Andrew, thank you so much for taking some lead on this and highlighting what the costs are. I've been involved with the DOE and their Energy Star and their healthy building initiatives and so on and so forth, and involved in some of their presentations. You're right. The cost of implementing this is small. Adding in a MERV 13 is probably $50 to $100. Adding in advanced filtration like PCO or UV or plasma filtration is probably about $400 or $500, $700. ERVs, which are mandated, are more like $5,000. But the cost of improving indoor air quality to a building or a home is about 1% of the cost, less than 1% of the cost. But what some builders are telling me, the ones that Andrew highlighted as building 90,000 and plus homes a year, could demand 3 to 5% more for health conscious clients, which are becoming greater and greater of a percentage of these buyers today. So there is a little bit of a incentive for builders, because if they do offer a better product, they can command more margin for whatever that's worth. That doesn't discount the fact that we need the governance moving forward. But there is a little bit of an extrinsic motivation for some of these developers, whether on the commercial or the residential side, whether they're selling a product or they're renting a product. There is an extrinsic motivation moving forward.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So I'd like to take a final question from the chat to get panelists' views on, and then I'll hand over to Iyad for closing statements. So this is from Kevin. Filtration technology and science has evolved substantially over the last 25 years, but filter system hardware has not. What needs to be done to create system efficiency, not just filter efficiency? Is there a company, an equipment company, providing this level of technology now? Who would like to answer that?
I'll take the first crack at it, Phil. This is a good question. The fact that we have filters as an element, not a system, part of the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. This is one thing we need to go back and immediately fix. Air filters need to be in their own system and then have a seamless integration with the HVAC system. But I cannot be driven by the limitation, for example, space limitation in HVAC system, driven by what the HVAC equipment would tell me and dictate to me what do I have to do. Filtration systems have their own requirement, their own phase velocity, their own space requirement to bring in the filtration efficiency that is of an interest. So yes, it's important. One more reason why we should go back to the drawing board, Phil. Back to you.
Any other specific views around that? Ellie, what would be your thoughts from a technology perspective?
I would say co-innovation. together, because I think so far a lot of companies or industries, from filtration perspective or industry perspective, they've been doing isolated innovation for themselves, and then the relationship was more on the customer supplier base, which more and more it is required to actually do co-innovation, which means that working together to develop an end-to-end system from the beginning, and all these individual components from the filter to the system completely together. So that would be my encouragement for the industries to start developing joint ventures or partnerships and defining co-innovation projects.
Thanks, Ellie. Anyone else to add anything before I hand over to Iyad for closing statements? Iyad, over to you then, just to round off what's been an excellent panel session. So handing over to you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you so much for World Filtration Institute. Thank you, Dr. Christine Sun, for facilitating this. I also want to thank our WFI team, Mike Malloy, Camila, and of course, last but not least, our amazing moderator who is unable to be with us today, Mr. Mitch McCurry. Thank you so much. To get the panelists today, it took a lot of work to communicate with them. We had a lot of participation. I also want to thank Ellie. Ellie, thank you so much for your leadership and also in helping us put this together. I want to thank Phil. Thank you, Phil, for moderating 5, 6, 7 great minds within the WFI. It's an amazing scale. I would have been nervous to be able to navigate, but you've done a good job. Thank you so much, Phil. We will conclude with closing statements, and by pre-agreement, the first closing statement goes to Peter. Peter?
Yeah, so my closing statement is basically, first off, I want to thank everybody, the panelists. I want to thank Dr. Iyad, Mitch McCurry, and Dr. Phil Webb for doing such an excellent job moderating this. At the end of the day, it comes down to governance needing to create incentives for indoor air quality improvements with the same urgency and commitment currently applied to reducing our carbon footprint. And that's really the governance working closely with understanding the new standards and understanding 241, embracing it, and hopefully making it a part of what the incentives are there for. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and our distinguished and first-time guest, who happened to be an amazing addition. Dr. Lagoudas, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Iyad. My brain is buzzing because we've had so many excellent comments, and I think also so much more that we could share. But summarizing a few thoughts in my head. First, I want to address, in some ways, the elephant in the room is that the United States government is under tremendous flux. And we're talking about policy and governance, and the federal government is in a major turning point that I think is putting many of us on pause in some of our engagements with them and creating uncertainties about the future. I know some panelists, some others have asked questions about this. The thing, though, that I will note is that there is still tremendous opportunity for change. And change can happen at the state and local level in the United States. Change can happen from, working with international partners. And I think this is a moment for an entity like the World Filtration Institute and other industry voices. This is the moment for industry to have tighter coordination, tighter voices, and create a shared goal and vision of advocacy. What are the resources we need as an industry, and moving the community? So I just want to note that there are major opportunities like the WFI to bring voices together, and the need for action. I want to mention and make sure we have a call to action to all of you in the audience that, we hope through this discussion you've seen there's an opportunity for change, but we need to demand it. And my call to action for each of you is to demand change from someone in your leadership. So looking up, it might be in your school board leadership, demanding action in your children's school. It might be in your office building. It might be in your state government. Brown University is based in Rhode Island, and I'm demanding action from the Rhode Island state government. I think getting involved, second piece, getting involved in national and global organizations. Nick and others have talked about the important role of ASHRAE, particularly in the United States and also globally. There are other organizations, Go, AQS, establishing global air quality standards is one. Organizations like this are important to have your voice as a part of. And then the third is demand change and help create public movement for legislators. And I think the main ask there is state, local, and federal governments should put someone in charge of indoor air quality, create voluntary metrics, and create incentives. Those are the three asks that I would recommend to you. And then my last call is that it's possible. We've seen tremendous change happen, even though sometimes it feels like we are taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. A dozen states in the United States are advancing bills to improve school indoor air quality. This is phenomenal. They've all been introduced in the past 4 years. The White House worked with CDC to establish the first ever guidelines for air quality outside of hospital settings for the entire United States. ASHRAE, in coordination and engagement with the work with the White House leadership, released 241, which is a tremendous advancement in the field. So all this to say, I think there is exciting groundwork that has been laid and much more that can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lagoudas, and our amazing moderator, Dr. Phil Webb. Your closing statement, please, sir.
Thanks, Iyad. So I have 2 children. I believe that they should have a future, they should have a healthier future, and they should have a prosperous future. But no one's going to have a future for their children if our buildings continue, for whatever reason, to provide poor, unhealthy, and unwell environments for them to go to school in, to work in when they're adults, to live in when they go home, and to retire in when they've done their piece for the world and are vulnerable adults. I think the importance for me is not just looking at filtration or air quality in isolation. It must be embedded in the way that we design healthier and better buildings, and it's got to include the way that we look at energy, and it's got to include the way that we look at materials, and it's got to look at the standards that we have to construct something that will have an enduring positive impact on health and well-being, not just when it's built, not in the first 5 years, but the full life cycle of the building. And I think the panel has started the path to illuminate what we need to do to be able to get there for the betterment, not only for kids in America, but for kids everywhere across the globe in a harmonized and healthier world.
Thank you so much, Phil. And Dr. Ellie, Phil wants for his children and grandchildren to have a dream and a planet and air quality worth fighting for. What's your closing statement, Dr. Ellie?
The same way that in schools we started teaching them about healthy eating and teaching them about calories and fibers and carbohydrates and what's better for your guts and your brain and everything. We should start looking into also educational contents for kids, starting in the school to care about what they're breathing, because it's the same impact that it will have as they're growing up on their health and well-being and cognitive ability. That would be one step, I would say. And then as the industrial parts, I encourage everybody to get together and start working together and developing technologies together and helping the policy makers also informing them what can be done in terms of incentivizing them in the right way. So all of them goes hand in hand, education, incentives, and policies, as well as the technology development.
Thank you, Dr. Ellie. Last but not least, Nick Agopian. Nick, your closing statement, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to the World Filtration Institute, Dr. Sun, Dr. Al-Attar, Mitch, and everyone contributing to this essential conversation. Clearly, it's something that needs to be percolated up to everybody's ears. As we look ahead, it becomes clear that clean air is no longer a luxury, it's infrastructure. And the convergence of science-based standards like ASHRAE 241, which was heavily discussed today, and performance verification protocols and emerging technologies. I mean, there were some people that were talking about what do we have out there, gives us the opportunity that will redefine how we design, build, and of course govern indoor environments. I'd like to add that Standard 241 is focused on pandemics, but equivalent outdoor air that Peter addressed using filtration inherently offers improved indoor air quality. So it's not just for pandemics, but improved indoor air quality as well on a real-time basis. I believe that innovation must be met with, of course, accountability, and that the future belongs to systems, as one of the guests mentioned, that is not only effective and sustainable, but verifiable in real-world conditions. Advanced filtration, smarter filtration frameworks, and resilient strategies should be our collective mission to deliver clean and safe air for every building and every person, including the children that we address right now. I think we need to continue aligning science and standards and policies in a way that will drive measurable outcomes. Of course, accelerating adoption, that's going to be critical. That'll earn the trust of people who live and breathe in these spaces that we all design and shape. Now, the panelists and attendees understand this need. However, for the masses, as I mentioned earlier, it's the best kept secret. And we all need to voice everything we've discussed right now to all levels, to educate policymakers, designers, and operators. Otherwise, it's going to remain the best kept secret. So thank you. And I think we all have a mission here that we need to address.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate this. I also want to celebrate with the panelists and the audience. The first live question today we got from Andrew Guido. Andrew is a longtime friend, and a very good friend of the Filtration Hour. The Filtration Hour is actually established 3 years ago to give the microphone back to the audience. So we have the audience get its voice heard. So thank you so much, Andrew. And to celebrate this, we would like to hear your closing statement.
Thank
Andrew?
you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And by the way, I can be a good time friend. But and thinking about this, once you know, you can't unknow. Just like watching an accident, you can't unsee it. With it comes a great burden of responsibility to do something about it. And I'm encouraged by what I hear, and I'm encouraged by what I see. And I think it's just going to take bottom up and top down. I don't think we can do it without all of that. A long time ago, I had an insight that I'd like to share, and that is the fringe shapes the middle. And I think that's where we're at here, is that we're on the outer side trying to work our way into the decision makers and the people that can make something that's going to happen. And I think with time and with better technology and better evidence, the moment that we can make air look like mud, and you look at it and you say, I would never drink that glass of dirty water, is the moment that we'll be able to move the needle on this, along with light and with a whole bunch of other things that affect indoor environmental quality. And sensor technology is getting cheaper, and we will get there. I'm encouraged by it, but we have a ways to go.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And to conclude, I'd like to invite our rising filtration star, Dr. Christine Sun, to have some final remarks. Dr. Sun, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for our distinguished panelists. Fantastic discussion, and thank you for your leadership and contributions as we work together for a cleaner, healthier, and a more sustainable world. Our next session will be nanofibers in filtration next Tuesday. And also, we will be in France for WFC 14. We hope you can join us. We are going to launch 2 topics. One is advanced filter media technologies and the trends and opportunities. And another topic is a new topic, global filtration markets, technologies and trends. Hope we see you there and take the advantage, we connect, and also the joint efforts, how we can do together to promote filtration and separation for a better world. And we cannot conclude this session without thanking our members. So thanks again for all our speakers and our audience for this fantastic session, and we're looking forward to see you all in our next session. Thank you so much.
Dr. Sun. Thank you, Dr. Sun. I just want to remind the audience, the panelists, and the WFI global audience that World Filtration Institute will continue to bring critical topics to be addressed here at this platform and in all our programs and courses to bring and induce change. And hopefully we can all aim for the sustainable and bright future, not only the kids of Phil, but all our kids, that they can strive and dream of a future worth fighting for. Thank you so much. This is Filtration Hour.
Thank you, everyone.